Supreme Court is going to hear oral argument this morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time in the case of Fisher versus the United States, which is questioning whether or not a federal statute can be used in the manner that it was against many of the January 6th defendants. And so the question presented in the case is, did this D.C. Circuit Court err in construing this federal statute which prohibits obstruction of congressional inquiries and investigations to include acts unrelated to investigations and evidence? And of course, the mainstream media is, they're reporting this completely and totally fairly and unbiased. And their headlines this morning: Supreme Court could upend felony charges against January 6 rioters. That's coming from ABC News. USA Today is Supreme Court weighs charges in January 6 cases. Will it help Trump? And then Slate, which is one of my favorite ridiculous leftist outlets, the Supreme Court helps Donald Trump avoid a January 6 trial before the election. The AP charges against Trump and January 6 rioters at stake as Supreme Court hears case. So they're panicking per the usual. But joining me now to discuss all this and more is Will Chamberlain, who is senior counsel with the Article 3 Project. So good morning, Will.
Good morning, Jenna.
Yeah. So despite the hysteria from the mainstream media headlines, this is an important case this morning. So what do you make of it?
I think the Supreme Court is going to reverse all the D.C. Circuit and find that the use of the statute was improper. And the basic logic here is that this statute basically, if you read it extremely narrowly and outside, without looking at the context of where it is in the law, it just says if you do something to obstruct an official proceeding, that's a serious felony. And the problem is that, basically the way that the DOJ looked at it is like, oh, okay, well, the January 6th happened and these people stopped, briefly interrupted the certification of the electoral votes. Therefore, that means they obstructed an official proceeding. But I think what the court's going to say is that this is a statute that is in where it's situated in our body of law. It's about evidence tampering, right? Think about obstruction of justice, right? Like physically destroying evidence, tampering with a witness, telling them to lie on the stand, things of that nature, destroying documents. In fact, that's when the statute was originally written was after the Enron scandal, when Arthur Andersen, the accounting firm, had deleted a bunch of documents in advance of trial. So the idea that this statute that is dealing with obstruction of justice and evidence issues can suddenly be applied to like a riot or a protest doesn't make any sense. And I think the Supreme Court is going to reverse the D.C. Circuit.
Yeah, and this is an important case. I mean, regardless of what anyone's political position is on, any of these questions surrounding, Trump, January 6th, all of that. Which, my position, my opinion is that there were people that committed crimes on January 6th and should be prosecuted, and there were people that didn't. And your mere presence at the Capitol building, in terms of outside, there were a lot of journalists, for example, that were there that got prosecuted. Those things are over prosecuted. And in terms of a statute like this, it's important that in terms of fair notice for our law to be construed properly, because if this particular statute was not designed to capture the behavior that occurred, then it shouldn't be applied in this type of way to a prosecution just to get ultimately to a conviction. That's not how the law works. And so that begs the question, if the Supreme Court does overturn this, for some of the January 6th defendants, why did the DOJ use this particular statute, knowing that this was a contortion of the intent of the statute and this was a possibility potentially all along?
Because they're lazy. Let's just be frank. Like, DOJ is lazy and decided that this was a simple way to bring a very serious charge against things that normally they would be charging, $50 misdemeanors for. But it's also, I think, Andrew Weissman is still very much deeply involved with DOJ, and people have to understand this very same statute was used to go after President Trump during Russiagate. President Trump fired James Comey, if people remember, And Andrew Weissman's theory was that this constituted obstruction of an official proceeding because President Trump was trying to stop Comey's investigation. Again, the same exact problem where you have a statute that's supposed to be about evidence tampering and interrupting the functioning of a court in an actual hearing, and instead is just treated so generally as to apply to stopping anything. And so I think that this is not the first time the statute has proven really troublesome because of how broadly it's worded, and I think it's really about time that the Supreme Court fix this. And DOJ really gets slapped down for what is ultimately lazy lawyering. They should have seen this coming. This is not the first time that the Supreme Court has had to cabin in what the DOJ was doing on an obstruction of justice charge or some other claim. And they should not be surprised that they're about to lose hundreds of convictions.
And I'm speaking with Will Chamberlain, who's the senior counsel at the Article 3 Project, which does really great work, by the way, and you can find them online, and you can also follow Will Chamberlain and also Mike Davis, who is one of the founders of the Article 3 Project. He has been a guest many times, friend of the show. And Will, so in the media, we've also talked about how the DOJ hasn't actually charged anybody with insurrection, quote unquote, which was part of the problem with the whole Supreme Court case that ultimately did not kick Trump off of the ballot in that Colorado case. And so is part of this also that the DOJ was just looking for a statute that they could possibly construe to capture the conduct that they wanted to prosecute, and there really wasn't a statute that was beyond, maybe breaking and entering or trespass or something that would get a nominal fee?
Right, like they were reaching for something more serious. And obstruction of initial proceeding is a very serious. I think it's a maximum penalty of 20 years, but based on the sentencing guidelines, what you end up with is roughly around 3.5 to 4 years is sort of an average sentence for obstruction of an official proceeding. And they didn't have another crime like that they could charge them with. I think that's why that's another reason why they reached for it. But again, it's.
Well, and then this is so, I think, so frustrating for Americans who want to see fairness in the system, because, again, if someone commits a criminal act that can be proved beyond any and all reasonable doubt, and it is something that it deserves to be prosecuted fairly, that's a very different situation, and that's how our law should work. It shouldn't be that, for political acts or against political opponents, then you go searching for a statute that may potentially fit conduct because you want to prosecute the individuals. And that gets us, of course, to the other big trial that is going on, or hearing this morning that just started in jury selection yesterday, which is the New York case against former President Trump. And I touched on it just very briefly yesterday, talking about I don't think that there's any way that Trump can get a fair jury in that particular jurisdiction, but there was no venue change, any of that. But the case itself is just so ludicrous. I mean, this was the first indictment against former President Trump, and even leftists, even Democrats who are looking reasonably at what was charged, say that this is a ridiculous case, and yet 6 to 8 weeks is the potential time frame, and Trump is going to have to sit there in the defendant's chair and not be able to campaign, do other things, and not only that, I mean, he has potential liberty and freedom on the line because it's a criminal matter, and so talk about the outcome of what this means for our country in terms of a legal precedent of going after political opponents rather than just the political fallout, because I think that's where a lot of the media is talking, but we should be very concerned as conservatives what kind of precedent this type of prosecution sets.
Well, so I think I'm of the belief that the conservatives should not unilaterally disarm. Democrats have breached a major political norm, which is honoring the other political party to the extent of not prosecuting them randomly. And here prosecuting the nominee of one of our two great president parties, and not for murder, not for theft, but for being the victim of Michael Avenatti's blackmail, in effect. that's what they're prosecuting the guy for, and they want to jail him in the run-up to a presidential election. It's a horrible precedent to set because it does, it puts our democracy in serious danger. That said, I mean, Republicans have to respond to this. They can't just ignore it. I think if Republicans manage to take power in the fall, President Biden should be prosecuted for his China dealings. There should be a full-blown investigation of him and his entire family. And there should be, you've opened the floodgates. And what's clear about Democrats is that unless they feel the pain of their own rules, they will continue to do unprecedented things and twist the law to abuse our democracy. And so, I think ultimately the result I want to see is a new political settlement where everybody agrees that these tools need to not be used. But I don't think we get there unless Democrats feel the pain of this new rule.
And that's a fair analysis, because if Republicans just continue like their very lame impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden, and they're not using that political tool, which is what the Democrats made it into with their two ridiculous impeachments of Donald Trump, then that's not going to stop anything. And so it's not to say, at least in my opinion, it's not to say that Republicans should go outside the margins of the law by just foisting this as a political tool and doing unnecessary or sham prosecutions, but at the same time actually going after people who deserve that, like I think Biden with his China dealings and some of those things that actually should be reasonably prosecuted, but Republicans just haven't in the past because it's been more political in nature. And yet when we're seeing that some Democrats deserve to be prosecuted and aren't, and people like Trump in this instance don't deserve to be prosecuted and are, then that's not a stable system. And so how do we as conservatives make sure that we're still following the rule of law, but still getting to ultimately what I think you very aptly described as, as a settlement of sorts to say, okay, we're going to not use this for weaponized political purposes, if it's even possible with the radical extreme leftists at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the settlement you want because that is good for the country. But I mean, if this is basic, this is basic tit for tat. It's you can go to evolutionary biology and find this out. There's a great equilibrium if everybody cooperates, but if one side defects and you keep cooperating, then you'll just continually be exploited. And that's kind of the situation Republicans find themselves in, where, Republicans worry about what precedents they're going to set, but Democrats do unprecedented things all the time. So it's a very, that's not stable. And what the thing about Republicans have to understand about Democrats is they don't care about procedural fairness because they are convinced they are substantively 100% correct. And that we are morally defective for not agreeing with them. So procedural fairness to us undermines their substantive moral goals. So once you get that, you realize the only way to get liberals to care about procedural fairness is if they understand that it is in their own self-interest. And to make them understand that it's in their own self-interest, they must feel the pain of their own rules.
Well argued, and that's why I appreciate you, Will Chamberlain, who's senior counsel at the Article 3 Project, doing great work over there. Really appreciate your time, and if you want to listen to the oral argument, of course, you can go and stream the audio live at the Supreme Court's website, supremecourt.gov. Of course, C-SPAN also has that, and I prefer there because they actually show who's speaking at the moment. It's a little bit more sophisticated than the Supreme Court's website, but the case is Fisher versus United States. For that January 6th case that is going up to the Supreme Court. It's going to be very interesting to see what questions and how much of the politics are discussed from the bench rather than just the case, but we'll see. So 10 a.m. Eastern, but we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
The words you are about to hear are taken from letters sent in by members of the Trinity Debt Management Program.
Dear Trinity, today I'm making my final credit card payment.
Before I came to you, I was in a constant state of anxiety and panic, but now there is hope for my family's financial future.
Working with Trinity made me understand that I'm not alone.
You really do help people.
Your kindness will never be forgotten.
Without Trinity's support, I would not have achieved my lifelong goal of becoming debt-free. Trinity.
We saved a lot on interest and penalties, of course, but the reward was the gift of human kindness.
Trinity has carried me through a very difficult time in my life. You're amazing.
I used to feel so anxious and hopeless. Now I feel grace and peace.
God bless Trinity as you continue to help others become debt-free.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813.
Let's see, if something costs less, but people are happier with it, that sounds like something to look into, and that is MediShare. And maybe you've heard switching to MediShare to pay for healthcare can save many families up to $500 a month, and that's huge, but it's also true people are way more satisfied after making the switch too. The member satisfaction rate for MediShare is double that of the typical health insurance plan. Double. MediShare works, too. It's been around for 30 years. Members have shared more than $5 billion of each other's bills. People love having telehealth and a huge nationwide PPO network. So, yeah, really, you can save a ton and like it better. Imagine being happy with how you're taking care of your health care. So if you're self-employed or part of the gig economy, or you just want a plan you're happy with, you can call right now and get a price within 2 minutes. See what you can save. This is a very, very smart use of 2 minutes. Here's the number you need. Call 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
While in the emergency room with my wife, as she was struggling with the COVID-19 virus herself, and I looked at her, I said, "Are you scared?" And she said, a little bit, but I've been through worse.
The Certainty of Mankind's History with Uncertainty, an article by Peter Rosenberger.
And then, as her fever was approaching almost 103, she started singing "In Christ Alone." I place my trust and find my glory in the power of the cross. And that's how she has anchored herself in the certainty of Christ through her huge medical journey that has included 80 surgeries, both of her legs amputated, 100 doctors have treated her, 12 hospitals, and now the COVID-19 virus. And so when we live with those kinds of uncertainties, anchoring ourselves in Christ alone, that's the only place we can run to where there is certainty.
To read this article and more, visit afa.net/The Stand.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And according to the Washington Post this morning, the FBI has opened a criminal investigation focusing on the massive container ship that brought down the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore last month, a probe that will look, at least in part, at whether the crew left the port knowing the vessel had serious systems problems. And according to NBC, this probe comes as the Baltimore mayor, Brandon Scott, announced Monday the city is taking, quote, legal steps to address the bridge collapse, hiring law firms to launch legal action to hold wrongdoers responsible and to mitigate the immediate and long-term harm caused to Baltimore City residents. It'll be interesting to see the report as well from the NTSB that comes out, and continuing to follow that story. Also, according to Daily Wire this morning, Senator Ted Cruz slammed President Joe Biden this week for Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel over the weekend, saying the Biden administration paid for the missiles and drones that Iran used. Cruz said it was the first direct attack on Israel from Iran in history, and it is an extraordinary escalation of what has been going on. This tragically is the result of the Biden foreign policy of appeasement and the entire Democrat Party backing away from Israel and sending billions of dollars to Iran. In a very real sense, the missiles that fired at Israel were paid for by the Biden administration. Cruz said that the administration allowed the sanctions on missiles in Iran to expire. So joining me now is our good friend Josh Hammer, who is the senior editor at large for Newsweek and the syndicated host of The Josh Hammer Show. So Josh, do you agree with Senator Cruz?
Jenna, great to join you as always. So look, for 45 years, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been in a state of war, whether that state of war is declared or undeclared, with not just Israel, but the broader West. And they have primarily sought to wage this war via a sprawling network of proxies, both throughout the region and throughout the world, for that matter. Hezbollah would be one prominent example of that. When Hezbollah murdered many U.S. armed military men in the barracks of Beirut, Lebanon in the early 1980s. That was the work of Hezbollah, directly traceable to the Iranian regime. In the 1990s, all the way in Buenos Aires, Argentina, when Hezbollah cells blew up a Jewish civic facility there. Actually, an Argentinian court just found, literally this past Friday, for the first time, even though the event was 30 years ago, that the Iranian regime was responsible. Again, it was the Iranian regime. But the point I'm trying to make is that for 45 years, this has been done via their proxies. They have occasionally brazenly sought to launch attacks from their own soil, but it has been very rare. And this is a historic moment where they have now waged a war. I mean, sending hundreds of drone missiles, cruise missiles, surface-to-surface missiles, literally hundreds. This is an unambiguous act of war. Casus belli would be the Latinate term. I mean, this is an act of war under any doctrine of international law. And they've done it now out in the open from their own soil for the whole world to see. And it's miraculous. We should be extraordinarily thankful that Israel's missile defense, their air defense systems worked so well. And we should also be thankful for the fact that there was a coalition of forces, the U.S., the UK, France, and indeed at least two Arab countries as well, Jordan and Saudi Arabia, which is fascinating. We should be thankful that all of them worked together with the IDF to repel this attack. 99% of the projectiles didn't even make it to Israeli soil, which is incredible. And there have been no fatalities. There was one girl who had to be rushed to the hospital due to shrapnel from a falling projectile. But overall, it could have been a heck of a lot worse, for which we should be grateful. But unfortunately, Jenna, it's not a sustainable situation where a civilian population, must be forced to resort to relying on air defenses to make sure that they're not blown out of their homes either.
Yeah, and watching some of that footage from late Saturday night in Israel into Sunday morning was just horrific. I mean, it looked like what you would think of when Christians at least say, we look forward to the end of all things and what the wars and rumors of wars that are described in the book of Revelation in the Bible. I mean, it literally looked like something out of a page of that. And from the standpoint of potentially being on the brink of World War III, some commentators are suggesting that Russia may get involved, and then with the United States potentially engaging, then we're kind of setting up ourselves for a much bigger escalation. Where do you see things potentially going after Iran now engaging?
Well, look, I don't think that this is going to be World War III. I mean, that's the first and most obvious, and I think most important point to make here. It is worth emphasizing that the Iranian regime went out of their way via their I hesitate to call it an ambassador because this entire regime is illegitimate, but their person who speaks to the United Nations, he went out of his way on Saturday in a statement that I saw to say that was going to be it. And you might say, isn't that enough? This is literally hundreds of projectiles and missiles. And sure enough, it is. I mean, again, this is an unprecedented attack. They were clearly trying to overwhelm the Israeli air defense and missile defense systems. Thank God, again, that they were unsuccessful in those endeavors. But the fact that they went out of their way, they shifted away, at least in that moment, from their bellicose rhetoric, suggests to me that they actually are on a certain level scared. Now, they would be a lot more scared, they would be a lot more nervous if the Biden administration, if the American presidential administration actually was committed to doing the right thing here, which is basically as simple as standing with our allies and standing with our enemies like the Trump administration did. That's essentially all you have to do in the Middle East. That's why the Trump administration's foreign policy there was so clearly successful. But I don't think that this is going to unravel that much further. Now, having said that, Israel's going to have to do something. They can't just sit there and take it. Now, Joe Biden is encouraging Netanyahu that all you need to do, Bibi, is what Biden is saying, is just take the win here. Well, it's not really a win, though, Jenna, is it? I mean, again, it could have been so much worse, and thank God for those missile defense systems holding up in spectacular fashion. And it wasn't just Iron Dome, which shoots down the low-level mortar rockets from Gaza. They actually use some much more sophisticated technology in Israel as well. They actually use essentially a space laser for the first time, an Arrow 3 space interception. I mean, incredible stuff. I mean, really spectacular 21st century war technology. By the way, a lot of that technology will ultimately find its way back into American hands as well. One of the many benefits of the U.S.-Israel relationship is that we work together to develop technology just like this. But Israel's going to have to strike back in some capacity just to restore deterrent power. I don't necessarily think that they're going to start attacking Iranian nuclear sites. I wouldn't be shocked if they did so. I just don't think that the political map is such that Israel can feel good about its decision if it does that. And what I mean by that, again, is that the Biden administration is so pathetically unhelpful. So my best guess is that Israel will really up the ante against Hezbollah in Beirut, in the heart of Lebanon, and really try to take out some Hezbollah leaders. But I wouldn't be surprised, Jenna, if you start seeing some incursions into Iran itself. But again, I think the Iranian regime is scared after this robust demonstration of Israeli military superiority, and I don't think it's necessarily going to unravel that much further from here.
That's somewhat encouraging, I think, especially compared to a lot of the perspectives that we've gotten from the more hysterical branches of the mainstream media over the last couple of days. And I'm speaking with Josh Hammer, who is the senior editor at large for Newsweek and host of the nationally syndicated The Josh Hammer Show. And so what about accountability for Biden for all of these sanctions, waivers, and potentially the responsibility of basically what Senator Cruz is saying, that that this is really Joe Biden's fault in terms of providing the funding to Iran and to allow these missiles to go over to Israel. I mean, is there any sort of congressional inquiry or anything? I mean, of course, Republicans are not really doing much with their very slim majority, but is there anything that should happen along those lines in terms of accountability, particularly before November?
Look, I think that Joe Biden has a lot of blood on his hands. That's probably the most polite way that I can say it. I mean, if you go back to this past September, Jenna, the U.S. paid a $6 billion ransom to free 5 U.S. citizen hostages. That's $1.2 billion. $1.2 billion per hostage. That was paid to the Iranian regime in mid to late September, just a matter of weeks before the Hamas pogrom of October 7, 2023. It was literally only one day after the Hamas pogrom that the Wall Street Journal, which is no slouch of a media outlet, the Wall Street Journal reported that Hamas had been training inside of Iran for a very long time when it came to perpetrating the atrocities of that day. That conclusion has not yet been corroborated by U.S. intelligence agencies, but I continue to believe that it is by far the most likely explanation as to how Hamas was prepared to execute the tragedies of that horrific day there. And unfortunately, the Biden administration has continued doing the exact same thing when it comes to Iran ever since then. It was just a few weeks ago, literally almost a month ago to the day, in early March, where they freed another $10 billion in sanctions waivers. This was money that was holed up in Iraq, and the Biden administration went out of their way to free up that money for the Iranian regime. They are still bending over backwards, Jenna. And, another thing to bear in mind here is that there was a remarkable scoop that went underreported this past September. It was from the outlet called Semaphore. And you had some others pick up on it. The Wall Street Journal picked up on it. The great Lee Smith wrote a fantastic essay about it for Tablet magazine. And the scoop from Semaphore, they got emails essentially showing that the Iranian regime was working to orchestrate a high-level spy ring in the corridors of power right here in America. It was called the IEI, the Iran Experts Initiative. And this high-level spy ring was trying to get to the heights of the U.S. government, think tanks, academic institutions, essentially trying to put Iranian regime sympathetic toadies on the ground in positions of power here in the U.S. And sure enough, they actually succeeded. In fact, there was one high-ranking person who continues, last I checked, to be employed by the U.S. Department of State. You've had some Republican senators call for her to have her clearance revoked. And it was Robert Malley, who was the lead negotiator for the Obama administration on the 2015 nuclear deal, who was Joe Biden's Iran special envoy. Robert Malley was a tip of the spear of this Iranian regime information influence operation. By the way, Robert Malley has had his security clearance suspended, surprise, surprise, since last summer. We haven't actually heard a formal explanation from the Biden administration as to why that is. I think we can surmise as to why that is. But all that to say is that they're being extraordinarily less than forthcoming when it comes to the Iranian issue. And again, the fact that this happened so explicitly out in the open, the only silver lining here is that maybe some of these people will finally wake up.
We would hope. And, with Donald Trump tied up in the ridiculous trial up in New York, it seems that his focus is on commentary on there, and everything that I've seen from Republicans at large, but particularly the Trump campaign just over the last 48 hours has been almost exclusively focused on that, which is a big deal, but also shouldn't the Trump camp put more out on the disastrous foreign policy of Joe Biden and all of these things that you were just talking about, Josh Hammer, looking ahead to November? And it seems like they're just focused on the distractions that the Democrats have created.
Yes, I would prefer to see the Trump administration take a stronger and more robust stance when it comes to the current conflict in the Middle East. So look, Donald Trump's his instincts are for America to be less involved in the world. And I actually share those instincts. I am actually, believe it or not, Jenna, a vociferous critic of moralistic nation-building crusades. I was a staunch opponent of America remaining in Afghanistan for as long as it remained there. I have no interest in trying to, quote-unquote, spread democracy or spread freedom. But having said that, the world is a complex place where intercontinental ballistic missiles can travel very quickly here. And the idea that with current technology that you can just sit back home in Fortress America and just let the chips fall where they may, so to speak, is utterly ludicrous. And Donald Trump actually, on an intuitive level, again, his instincts are for America to be less involved, but he also is a fight back, punch back hard kind of guy. And his administration, if you look at the policies, it was not Tucker Carlson isolationism. The Trump administration's foreign policies were actually largely prudential peace through strength. He killed Qasem Soleimani, the arch-Iranian terrorist at the airport in Baghdad, Iraq, in January 2020. He put missile defense in Czech Republic and Poland to reassure our Central and Eastern European allies and keep Vladimir Putin